Hey friends, welcome to another episode of Coming Up Next. Before we get to the interview, are you subscribed to the podcast? It's really straightforward to do, and you know what? It's going to streamline your podcast listening experience. Head to comingupnext.com.au. On said page, you'll find all 188 previous episodes of Coming Up Next, the podcast, as well as links to iTunes, to Stitcher, to Podbean, to whatever your platform of choice is. All you have to do is click on one of those buttons and then hit subscribe. It's going to download into your pocket each and every week episodes like my interview this week with Shae-Lee Shackleford. Good afternoon, good evening, and good night, my friends. Welcome to Coming Up Next, the podcast. A late release this week. It's currently Tuesday morning in London, which means it's Tuesday evening in Melbourne. We normally do the release, I guess, in the morning, but for one reason or another, I haven't. Well, I've been stuck in a Leaving Neverland wormhole, which is rabbit hole, which is not a great place to be at 1 o'clock in the morning. But yeah, it's all so very compelling, I suppose. Looking at all of the arguments on all of the sides. If you haven't seen the show, I have no interest in promoting it aside from a general curiosity and an interest in understanding but the truth of the situation. I am finding it very difficult to draw any definitive conclusions. And I would challenge you to challenge anyone who does have any definitive conclusions at this point in time to do as much reading as is humanly possible. Anyway, that's the reason for the late release this week. Before we get into this week's interview with Shae-Lee Shackleford, I'd like to thank my guest from last week, Lizzie Kempton, a documentary filmmaker who I had the pleasure of meeting last year, and we sat down last week and chatted about her career in the documentary filmmaking world in the UK. She's got a very exciting project that she's working on at the moment. Anyway, head to comingupnext.com.au to listen to that, to find the back catalogue of podcast rambles. They're all there. The show, well, I think I'm going to make an announcement next week about the show, about what's going on, about how things are moving. But that's for next week. This week, I have a very exciting guest. She is one of the creators of sketch group Sketchy. You can find all their stuff online. It's on YouTube. It's on Instagram. But I was really interested to speak to Shae-Lee Shackleford about her career, about riding the crest of the social media revolution, I guess you could call it. About what it's been like to create work and see it go quote unquote viral. About uprooting her life from well, I thought she was from Sydney, but from the Sunshine Coast. It's pretty amazing to speak to someone who has that kind of insider point of view at this point in time. Anyway, we speak about all the usual things, so let's get into it right now, my friends. Coming up next, episode 189, Shae-Lee Shackleford. Taken you to Brisbane. I know you're from Sydney originally, right?
I'm actually from the Sunshine Coast originally. Like Sunshine Coast is where I grew up, but then Sydney. I was in Sydney for a commercial, like directing a commercial, and then my family and my fiance's family is up here in Brizzy. So we decided to extend the trip and come up and just see them and have a few days off.
Yeah, right. So, whereabouts in the Sunshine Coast did you grow up?
Coolum, Coolum
Coolum.
Beach.
Yeah, okay, cool. There's is it a club? Like a big,
Oh yeah, the Hyatt or something. Is that what you mean? The Hyatt Regency or something?
yeah, something like that. I remember going when I was, I think I just finished school with my girlfriend at the time. We went to, I feel like it was attached to a golf course or something.
Yeah, I think that is the Hyatt Regency. It's like, and it has like the pool that's like on the beach kind of thing, and yeah, it's a pretty popular spot where a lot of people kind of go and have their holidays, and yeah,
Right.
right near Mount Coolum. Yeah.
So what was were you always interested in performing and directing growing up? Was that your thing?
Yeah, 100%. I suppose if I sort of think back to it, like initially I always wanted to act. Like that was sort of like when I was a teenager, I started doing sort of acting school outside of school and stuff. And obviously those were the subjects that I really liked in school. But interestingly enough, like my strongest subject at school was film and TV, where it was more the actual creation of like doing short films and little documentaries and things like that. And then, yeah, it was sort of, I left school and was doing acting and sort of ended up getting more involved in the behind the scenes kind of stuff. And then was like, no, actually my skill set is full on that I'm a director, because I have sort of concepts and obviously I write as well, but I really enjoy kind of coming up with things and sort of seeing them through to completion. So I think kind of interestingly, like as a kid growing up in Australia, as a woman growing or a young girl growing up in Australia, I don't think there's many people going, you know what, you should be a director. So I was just like, it wasn't something that I think, and that's part of, I think, probably why there aren't as many female, it's like, I got the Gender Matters grant last year from Screen Australia, and that's because they're trying to tackle the fact that it's only 14% of the total industry in Australia is made up by female, like heads of department, creatives, and I think part of it is that it's just like a cultural thing that it's not necessarily sort of seeded to girls so much at a younger age. You sort of like it's more acting and things like that, but acting's still a fantastic way to get into it, and I've learned a lot about everything that I do now just from starting out like that. So yeah, it's sort of always been there in just different forms.
It's an interesting, I guess, point in in the current climate with how much attention and focus is being put on equal opportunity and diversity in the entertainment industry in Australia. That it's not only really about I guess there being more opportunities, but also in an education and an understanding that there is a possibility that that's something that young women or people in minority groups could pursue, because prior to, I guess, even the last sort of 10 years, there haven't even really been role models, or the role models have been few and far between.
Yeah. 100%. And so that's the thing is, yeah, so it's sort of like there's a push for it. And so then now the great thing is, I suppose there's probably going to be a whole new wave of younger people that are like, oh, that's being spoken about. It's, it's something that, is that something that I would want to do and sort of fulfill that role? But yeah, it definitely wasn't something that, was, I suppose, like, yeah, I had on my radar more so when I was younger. Although I always, my first short film I ever did, I wrote it, I directed it, I was in it, so I've always kind of made my own opportunities no matter what was kind of going on around me. But I think it's only been in the last 2-3 years that I'm sort of like, oh no, okay, like, directing is 100% the thing that I'm supposed to do, I guess, and that I'm passionate about the most. So
sure.
Yeah.
One of the things that we always speak about on the show is whether or not you remember the first time, well, maybe not you specifically, because this is the first time I've spoken to you, but whether or not the person I'm speaking with remembers the first time that they did whatever it is that they now do for a living. So I suppose perhaps it would be acting, even though what you do now is directing, but do you remember the first time that you performed or created something as a kid?
Yeah, I mean, I actually think it was when I used to force my cousins and everything, like every school holidays. It was like five, six of us, and I would basically every single school holidays force them to put on like a variety show at Christmas. And so like that was kind of, I suppose, the start of like just bossing everyone around and like, okay, you're gonna do this number, you're gonna do that, like that's not good enough, you know. And everyone loved it. But yeah, it's kind of like, I suppose, one of the first ones I remember just being like, okay, this is like, I'm going to orchestrate this performance, you know, and perform myself. And then I think, yeah, at school I did a short film when I was in, I think, about grade 10. That did really well. That became kind of like, you know, they ended up using it for all the different grades to sort of show as a proof of concept. This is how you can do this. It was like in camera edit kind of a thing. And yeah, so that's, I wish I still had that. I lost it, but that was one of the first times I remember making something, and sort of being like, oh wow, this is like, you know, I really do love this, you know.
Do you remember what it was about?
Yeah, it was it was like because it was in camera edit and I shot it in black and white, and it was all my family and friends, again just like forcing them to be in it. So it was my dad and my brother like down like the creek, and they were pretending to be like hillbillies basically, and they needed to like go into town. And it was in like my grandfather had this old grey Mini, and so they jumped in that, and then all along the way they kept picking people up, but it was a Mini, you know. So the next thing you know, people are like jumping in the boot of the Mini, and you know, and so yeah, it was just like a little comedy thing. So interestingly enough, I also sort of really started in comedy then, I guess, and that's definitely where I found my footing in the industry, and obviously with Sketchy as well, and yeah, so comedy definitely sort of was there from the start.
Is comedy something that was quite apparent in your house growing up, or was it more something that you were doing outside of the house?
No, it was definitely apparent in my house growing up, and I think my dad definitely had a big hand in that because he's just, you know, he's a big kid himself, and he loves like Monty Python and, you know, that kind of humor. He introduced me to that like at a pretty young age as well, and yeah, and my sort of siblings, you know, I suppose, yeah, it was definitely a house with a lot of laughter and always kind of trying to make each other laugh and stuff. So yeah, I think that definitely sort of helped for me to kind of carve a bit of that out too, because it was, yeah, it was a fun household, and trying to make other people laugh was definitely like the thing you did, you know.
Like a sport.
Yeah, it was like, you know, like I said, doing those like dance performances and stuff at Christmas, and yeah. So yeah, it's nice to sometimes look back and think, yeah, oh, how that, because my mum and dad are very different. My mum and dad split when I was like 14, but it's interesting to kind of look back on the different things how they sort of shaped. You know, you sort of take certain things from your parents. There's some things you're like, oh, wish I didn't have that thing.
Mm.
but yeah, the different ways in which they kind of. My mum was very, very sort of behind me in wanting to do my acting classes, and she would, you know, take me to all those, and very encouraging and very sort of thing. And my dad was kind of he was funny, and you know, trying to make him laugh was like my thing. So those two things really sort of influenced me becoming a performer and a director, and all the things that I do now.
Right. What did your parents do, or do they do?
So my dad's a builder. And my mum actually works for Lifeline. She's like a state manager for Lifeline. So like sort of suicide prevention and stuff. So my mum's like in a much more sort of serious industry. But yeah, so they weren't in the industry or had anything to do with that. But I think that I was just very lucky in that they always supported all of the crazy things that I wanted to do. And going overseas, I went to London when I was about 18 years old. You know, and they always sort of supported all of those things that I've done, and even moving to Los Angeles now. And yeah, I'm lucky in that regard, I guess, is that there was never any ceiling on what I was and wasn't allowed to do, you know?
Sure. And I guess it sounds like you went to a school that was quite supportive of people who had creative endeavors.
Yeah, I did. It was Nambour Christian College on like the Sunshine Coast, and yeah, I have very fond memories of there, and the fact that they had film and television as a subject,
Yeah.
as well as drama, you know, and all that, and the fact that they had editing facilities, and yeah, that's where I started kind of making those little sort of shorts and documentaries and stuff. Yeah, which was great to be able to have at a young age.
So when you went to London, I guess that must have been when you just finished school.
Yes. Yep, I was. Yes, I was like 18, and I was kind of I was doing my acting stuff, and I wanted to do sort of more of it over there, but I ended up kind of falling into doing more So I got this very left field kind of job over there, which was great because all my friends were like working in pubs and stuff, and I was doing that. And just, touring around Europe for sort of 2.5 years, I did that. And that's kind of interestingly how I got back into sort of the industry when I came back to Australia, because I was doing all of like the festivals like Oktoberfest and Running of the Bulls and all of that kind of stuff. And I was like, this is incredible. Like, how is there not a show on this? So I like bought myself a little camera and just went around and started like shooting. Like I'd give it to like some random drunk dude and be like, can you just shoot this way? I'm going to say some stuff. And I made like a little pilot and shot it around to like a few of the different networks and stuff in Australia. And ended up falling on the desk of a guy named Graham Burrells, who was at Fox 8 at the time, and he loved it. And he was like, oh, I want to make this show, and he connected me with Southern Star, and that. So I came back to Australia, and that was looking like it was going to happen. It was like and the funny thing was, it was 3 girls traveling around Europe in a van, so it was like a van down under kind of a premise. But then the economic crisis hit. And it was that sort of time, like around 2009, where just like anything that wasn't a sure thing was just like, producers were losing their jobs. It was just like a really rough time, obviously, for the industry. So it just never ended up kind of going ahead. But what it did was it got me back into that kind of, okay, I'm making stuff more behind the scenes. I made contacts in that world, and I was more producing. And then I went on to producing for a few years before I started Sketchy. So going to London and stuff was a kind of roundabout way of getting back into what I do now, I guess.
Actually, the call like dropped out for like 1 second, where you said after you moved to London what the job was that you got that wasn't working in a bar. So I had no context for almost all of that.
Oh, right. So I was a flight attendant.
Right. Okay, cool. I'll just drop that in to...
Yeah.
I'll just drop that into the earlier sentence.
Okay, cool.
Okay, that sounds like, I mean, you came back to Australia then, and did you say that was when you started Sketchy at that point?
Well, yeah, so Sketchy was still a few years after that. So I was trying to pitch the travel show, and that was looking like it was going to happen and stuff. And then when it fell over because of the economic crisis, I started sort of doing more of my own sort of short films and stuff. And then I felt and could see at that time that there was a real void in like female driven content and comedy. So I was producing, I'd gotten more into, and I was producing like corporate videos and real estate videos and that kind of stuff, like boring, just, paint dry sort of content. But I had a lot of contacts that I was working with, and we all wanted to make more creative things. So on our weekends and stuff, we would shoot stuff, and so, camera guys and editors and whatever that were willing to kind of like jump on board when I said, hey, I want to create this like female driven sketches, and I originally wanted to make a television show, like a sketch television show, because this was sort of, it was about 5 years ago now, where online still wasn't like the thing that it is now. It was sort of like, okay, that's an option, but it's not something that, you'd still ideally want to go traditional. And that was sort of my mindset at the time. So, on weekends and stuff, and I met the 2 other girls, and they were both, really funny and sort of self-deprecating, and just, I don't know, their vibe was, I suppose, something that I went, yeah, this could be really great. Let's make like a little sketch troupe,
How did you meet them?
And I met them through like promo work, actually. So Lana, it was like a Top Shop thing where we were like riding bikes around Sydney for like the opening of Top Shop or something. And then I asked her to be in, because I was doing a short film at the time, and I said, oh, will you come and be an extra in this short film that I'm making called The Antisocial Network? And she was like, yeah, sure. And she had like an all-nighter, and she still came the next morning, like bright and early. And I was like, this girl's solid,
Yeah, she's reliable.
Yeah, she's reliable, and then she actually met Madison through another job, a similar kind of thing. And then I met Madison at her birthday. And so that's kind of how we met each other and started making stuff. But yeah, the intention was always to make a female driven television show. And so we made like this pilot, on just no money. And then I sort of went over to the States and tried to pitch it around and send emails of like, hey, like, just try to get some meetings and stuff. And it was really, really difficult, and just nobody would respond. And so somebody at that time was like, well, why don't you just try going online and building an audience that way? And so we were kind of like, oh, right. I sort of came back to Australia a little bit disheartened because, I'd gone over to sort of dazzle Hollywood with this thing that I'd made, and it just, it didn't work. And so once I came back and we started the channel, and then we were sort of really fortunate, I guess, that within only like, I think it was like 6 weeks maybe of having it up online, we had the Bohemian Cassidy like viral video followed by another viral video called Mime Through Time. And that just kind of set us on this trajectory for like years, which was not expected, but fantastic because we were able to basically get paid, to make content full time.
Yeah. I mean, it must be pretty amazing to reflect on now, having amassed, over 500 million hits on your YouTube channel alone. What that kind of, from probably feeling pretty despondent, from not getting even that travel show up in 2009 through to now where you kind of, you hold all the power of what you want to do.
Mm-hmm. Totally. And that's the thing, I suppose, that is just so amazing about like online, is that it kind of, the tables can turn like so quickly, and to be able to kind of, because obviously before that the gatekeepers were, the producers or the networks or these various things, and in order to get like opportunities you had to kind of I suppose do or conform to whatever it was that they wanted, and if you even got that far. Whereas, being able to create your own channel where you create your own audience, and then, the freedom to be able to do whatever you want is just, it's incredible. And it can continue to evolve. And, the amount of different opportunities I've been able to have because of it, has just been incredible. And that's really like, I mean, look, Sketchy was 100% where I really did kind of go cut my teeth on, bit of both actually, on directing, because I would sort of concept and write the majority of our concepts, and then I would, on set, even though I was in them, I would sort of direct them. And the web series that we did a couple of years ago which was more of like, we got a grant from, we were part of the Skip Ahead initiative with Screen Australia. And so we got like $100,000 to make a web series. And so we had a full-on crew and dancers and all the rest of it. And I directed that. And that was really the kind of second defining moment in my career where I was like, okay, directing is the thing that I really want to do. Because this is, I just love working with teams. I love working with, the different sort of heads of department to execute a vision. So that Sketchy enabled me to be able to do that, and still does. We're so obviously not making as much content these days because we're sort of all focusing more so on our own individual careers. But I still have that freedom that if I come up with a concept or an idea tomorrow, I can shoot it and put it up, which is great.
How significant do you think it's been? I mean, it sounds like, even when you were, at school and stuff, there was this, like you were always like across multiple kind of strands. You weren't sort of focused on doing one thing specifically, but more in creating good work, or just complete work. How significant do you think that's been, that you've been able to be across the board with multiple kind of strands?
I think I think for anybody sort of starting out, it's everything to be able to kind of, like they call you like a slasher, having these different skill sets and things that you can do in order to, keep moving forward. Because even being able to edit and do things like that, because you're not then, I know a lot of actors where I'm constantly sort of just trying to encourage them to make their own stuff, even if it's just on their phone or whatever it is, because I think, if you focus sort of too heavily on one thing, it's I don't know, I think that you're at the mercy of everybody else then, and that's kind of a hard space to be in because you don't really have control over your life and what you're doing, whereas for me, being able to kind of come up with something, pull the people together to make it, edit it, and then now have like a channel, I suppose, to be able to put it on. But even things like costumes and wardrobe, and like I did a short film last year for Sony Pictures, and that was like I was selected as one of 5 directors to create a short film, and they gave us basically like $10,000 to create that film. And of course my concept was extremely ambitious, like for the money that I had. So even though like I was directing it and I had a team and fantastic actors, whatever, I still did all the props myself. I did all the costumes, I did all of that, which is like a lot of work, but it's like it is, you know, it's just to the level that as somebody that is a wardrobe person or whatever I do, because I've done that for years now with what we do with Sketchy. So, and the money that saves you that you then can put on screen. Yeah, just so the quality of what you can create. Like a lot of the things I make now, people are like, it only costs what? Like, you know, if you know anything about production, is that it can be really expensive the moment you sort of get into that more like high production value sort of side of things. So yeah, I think for me, it's enabled me to kind of make things that I wouldn't have otherwise been able to without a lot of money, you know?
Yeah, and I think, and obviously there are things like that that can often inhibit people in the sense that it gives, I'm not going to say it gives them an excuse not to do something, but it certainly can block. I mean, I've definitely had the experience of writing a script or writing something and feeling like disempowered because it feels like, oh, it's going to be too expensive to make, or I'm not going, you know, I don't have the resources, or whatever the case may be.
Yep, totally. And that's the thing, is it's like, yeah, and then what happens? It stays on a page, you know, and that's kind of a travesty, because if it's something that is really good, but it's also, I think, being able to kind of like, I worked as a producer. I worked sometimes with directors who just didn't have the concept of like, this is what I want to do and this is the amount of money I have, and just being able to be like crafty about how you do that, or the things that you do sacrifice and stuff, and not being a pain in the ass when it comes to like, that is just not possible for the money that we have. I think it's made me much better. Like the commercial, I just did a commercial here in Australia last week, just with an agency. And similar kind of thing. It's an online campaign. It had like a decent-ish budget, but still, you know, I had to kind of like pull a lot of things in myself and ask a few favors from people and stuff, like, you know, not to do their full rate, because in Sydney the rates of people, now that I've been living in LA, I'm like, holy, it's crazy how much it actually costs to shoot things in Australia. I sort of forgot. Just there's not really an in-between, whereas in LA you have a lot of people kind of like hustling as well, like trying to make it a name for themselves too, so they're willing to kind of, you know, oh yeah, I'll do that for $200 for the day or whatever. You can get gaffers for $200 for the day.
Christ.
It's just like unheard of, you know.
Insane.
Yeah, whereas in Australia, like, you are looking at least $1,500, you know. So just those little kind of things, but you know, being able to sort of, I suppose, yeah, still create something and have your vision seen through, and know where, still make it happen, and I suppose know what you can and can't sacrifice on to make that the best that it can be.
Do you feel as though you, like, there's, what blocks do you get creatively, like, when you're working?
To be honest, like the last sort of year and a half, I would say, honestly, it just ends up being time. So, you know, you're like, okay, I have this great idea, or I have a female-driven kind of entourage concept, like female entourage sort of concept that I originally sort of did a trailer for last year, and I've been since redeveloping it because I'm going a bit of a different direction with it for after getting feedback from pitching and stuff, and it shows a lot of promise, and I have some great contacts that I really want to see, like, okay, what are the next drafts, whatever, and I've just been so swamped with other things that it just, you know, and to get really into that creative space of like of writing a pilot and getting it, you know, to a certain thing, you really do have to have almost like clear everything else out to be able to really totally like, there's this for Australia right now, the birds in the background.
It's making me homesick.
Yeah. But, you know, in order to really kind of birth something, you know, at that at the next sort of level up, the cool thing about online and those videos is like, I feel like you can come up with something like that day and you can shoot it, because it doesn't need like the character development and the, you know, it's more like, oh, this is funny, this is relatable, this works. Whereas, you know, for longer form stuff, you know, you really do have to knuckle in and get like, yeah, get really clear on every single part of that world. And so the hardest thing I've found in the last year is just finding the time to really do that, you know, because it's great because I'm getting lots of directing work and, you know, I'm still doing stuff with Sketchy and stuff. But yeah, it's hard when you don't have like a clear week to do, you know, to really, yeah, just create in that world and sit down and actually write. So I'm getting to a stage at the moment where I think I'm just going to have to start saying no to a couple of things, which is hard for me. That's not in my.
Yeah, you're always taught to say yes to everything.
Totally, you know, and I think that's great. And I think sometimes you do just have to go where the opportunity is. And because I've started getting more opportunities. I've just in Australia, I've joined with a production company called Fabric Films and been doing more commercials and stuff, which has been excellent, and I'm really grateful for that, and they're a great sort of team to work with, but obviously flying back and forth between the States and here, again, it's a lot of time, So yeah, I think it's just being able to juggle, and that's one of the things that I sort of, is by the time you sit down, you're like, okay, I'm going to do a little bit of work on this, and then if you don't sort of get back to it for a few days, by the time you sit down again, you're like, where was I? what was that character going to do? And I have a feature film that I'm working on, the same kind of thing, that I have attached to an Australian producer named Lee Matthews, who did Emo the Musical.
Yeah, I've had Lee on the show.
Familiar with it? Oh, nice. There you go. So Lee and I are currently developing a feature film script. So that's the thing. I really want to sink my teeth into a series or a film this year. And all of these sort of smaller projects keep kind of taking precedence. So I think I might have to just, as I'm saying it to you, I'm like, I'm going to just carve some time out for that.
Who needs sleep?
Mm-hmm. Exactly.
So when you mentioned before that Sketchy kind of took off in a quite expeditious manner.
Mm-hmm.
When it did start to, or when things did start to crank over and you see these first few videos starting to go viral and go crazy,
mm-hmm.
was there a kind of strategic plan for the stuff that you were going to put out next? Did you kind of start to feel into, things that may land or weighing up things or doing things by numbers, or was it much more, I guess, to use a shitty word, organic?
I guess it was a little bit of both, and we had such a crazy, I would say the next sort of 6 months to a year after those videos was just such an intense, crazy time, because the opposite kind of happens where, okay, you can't get an email back, and then the whole world just like kind of like reaches out to you and kind of like, yeah, like, so, and in Hollywood, so it was like all of the big agencies, all of the, like networks and various things all wanted to kind of meet with us. And, I think the reality is not a lot of them knew what they wanted to do with us, or what the kind of thing, but it was just like, oh, here's these girls, they've had this viral video, and, and a lot of people talking a lot of shit, excuse my French, but like, just you're sort of dealing with a whole different level of like trying to navigate like who is real and who's not. And, and so part of it was we were like, okay, like let's, the lip syncing and the, the costumes and that was sort of like, okay, we've really struck a chord with that. Let's keep doing that, but let's try and release, content as regularly as we can. At one point we tried to do the whole like release something every week, but because our content is so produced, and it's there's so much to it, we found that really hard to do, and it kind of in a way wasn't the best thing for us, because I think we ended up putting things out when they weren't as good as they could be and stuff like that. I think when people are doing more like vlog style kind of stuff and that's easy enough to do, right? Because it's just like it's simple. It's they can kind of churn them out. But the hardest thing was at that time when we weren't sure who to go with, and we met with CAA, we met with like 360, like some of these really, really big, and we kind of went with them for a minute, but we had this manager that we decided to go with, and he just said all the right things. He was just like, he could walk the talk and said, oh, I managed Robbie Williams. There was like a thread of like truth to like everything that he said, but in like actuality, it was just bullshit, a lot of it. But how he was able to kind of like, he did have a lot of contacts, and his dad managed Robbie Williams, not him, like just things like that. But anyway, he ended up just being a total swindler, and he stole like all of our money, the money that we made in like our boom period. He basically, like, when we started to kind of figure out that he was dodgy, we tried to kind of get out of it, and he was collecting money because of tax things in the States and all different sort of stuff.
Wow.
But it was pretty horrific, the whole
intense
experience. And the hardest thing about it was that we went really quiet online, probably in a time when we really shouldn't have. Because it was just like so consuming, and us like trying to deal with that. And he left us with debts, like, because there was like music licensing things that he hadn't paid, and from videos that we'd done, and just stuff like that. So it took us a good couple months to get back on track. And the fact that we even kept going after that, honestly, is kind of a miracle sometimes I think of it, because it's just, it was so horrible. But part of the strategy at that time was to kind of, okay, we've got this momentum, we're rolling, and that kind of really stinted it for a while. And look, you look back, and at the time it was horrible, and sometimes I think, how are we so stupid to go with a guy that ended up, we could have gone with anyone, in the whole world at that time, and we went with this guy. But I also very firmly believe that like things happen for a reason, and that every single thing is an opportunity to grow and learn. And as long as you can kind of get to the lesson quicker and quicker every time, then you're like, okay, I get that. That was that lesson. All right, I'm now like going to be more savvy the next time something like that comes up. So, I do think it was a positive that happened because we wised up really quickly, and we became kind of experts in contracts and business and accounting and the side of it that you don't necessarily think about as a creative. So that was kind of the immediate sort of whirlwind that we went on after those few viral videos.
Right. And I guess so after that, what year was that? That would have been what, like 2015?
It would have been, yeah. So it would have been, so because we had our videos were in 2015 when we did Ellen and that sort of, those videos. And then that would have happened towards the end of that year, I think, or the beginning of 2016.
What was that whole experience like?
Yeah. Ellen.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, it was crazy. Like even to this day, I'm sort of think, what the hell? Because that was our first ever TV appearance. So like, here we were doing stuff in like our backyard kind of thing. And then the next thing we're like, okay, you're going to perform on Ellen, and that's our first thing. So it was like we could have really bombed, and that could have been a very short, a short career indeed, But it was great. It was just incredible. You don't see her until you walk out on stage for that first time. So, it really is like a really genuine excitement when you sort of see her for the first time. And yeah, it was just great. Like to be able to kind of, and then 3 days later from that, we went over and did Good Morning America, and that was in like Times Square. And we were like rehearsing on the plane. And so, yeah, it was just,
it must have been so surreal.
Time. Oh, it really was. It really, really was. Especially because like the videos that we'd done that kind of blew up was like the three of us in the car, like, and one of them was literally shot in my dad's backyard, So yeah, it was pretty funny to kind of go from that. And that started like a whole thing, like, that whole car thing was really like, we sort of started that, which is insane to think, and like James Corden and all those sort of things, they came after that. So yeah, it was funny to sort of create this genre, which now, interestingly enough, like I could not want to get further away from.
Yeah, I bet.
It's like
getting typecast.
Yeah, it is. And there's always going to be a percentage of our audience that only want to see that. And I just sort of am like, I'm 33 in April, and I just sort of am like guys, I really know that you want to see that, but to me, that's just like creative suicide, to kind of keep having to do the same sort of thing, which like there's talent to some degree. And I think when the three of us do stuff in that kind of uniform choreographed way, it's great, but as an individual, like, it's like being part of a girl band, where you're just like, okay, now I'm sort of ready to carve out, and what the kind of stuff that I make on my own is quite different to that. So it's being able to kind of put boundaries around like, okay, how much do you cater to like what's, some of the audience wants, and how much do you just like go, okay, that was great, but now it's time to continue to evolve and make things and push yourself creatively to the next thing.
Well, I suppose that sort of to my initial question about that's led us here is, were you, sort of, let's say sort of after the managerial incident, were you creating stuff specifically for an audience, or were you still creating stuff that was just stuff that you guys thought was funny?
Yeah, so that's the thing, I guess, like during the managerial kind of period, I would say, like, and because just we had so much opportunities and stuff that were thrown our way, like a lot of what we ended up making in that little period was so much more about brand deals and stuff, which again, I don't know if was the smartest sort of thing, because, okay, you're given a brief, you have to fit to a thing, and people online know when they're being sold to as well, even though like we've gotten really good, and like so that's something that's I think helps me now with, the commercials that I direct, is like knowing how to still kind of like make something that's engaging that our audience really likes, but that is also, has a brand and they're paying for it, and etc. Like that's a kind of that's an art form in and of itself, to make something that's not just like a full on ad. But at that time, it was kind of like, oh, okay, here's like, we were sort of being pushed into like, where's the money? And after that whole experience, we like were like had to go, you know what, let's make things that we love and that we know that like our audience will love, and kind of go more where the inspiration is, as opposed to like, yeah, where we're being pushed,
Sure. Yeah, I guess that requires that certain level of trust, I suppose, that that there are going to be people who appreciate and enjoy the same things that you enjoy, and that are compelled by the same things that you are.
Totally. And I mean, look, it's been the best possible way though to kind of learn, especially with comedy, like what does and doesn't work. Like some of the things that, you know, you assume you're like, oh, this is going to be like so well received, and then, you know, there's things of it in it that you kind of totally missed that people, when online, they will not miss it. You know, like, and they're like the most brutal like critics, but it's great because you do get that instant kind of feedback, and you do really kind of like learn as you go along, and you know, sort of more and more like, yeah, just what does and doesn't work, which is great. And you know, so now we've made like, you know, hundreds of videos, and so through that you're able to sort of, yeah, figure out, okay, comedy wise, like, you know, what does and doesn't resonate. And in saying that as well, it's like you have to know when, okay, the sketchy audience will love that. Like, I want to make this though. And that's what's inspiring me. And that's the kind of like, when I did the Sony Pictures short film, I was really nervous because it's like a sort of like a romance through time kind of a thing. It has comedic elements in it, but it's sort of the brief that I was given for that. But it is more of a short film, and it's kind of starts in the present day, but then it goes to like, you know, a few sort of 1,000 years ago, and it's like some Africans in a cave, and then there's some Native Americans, and it's this little love story. Like, and then we go to ancient Egypt, but it's definitely not the generic kind of sketchy doing something, just singing, dancing, fun, you know, like all of that self-deprecating, you know, which is our sort of brand. And so I was really like a bit nervous to go, oh, how's the audience going to receive this? Because this is so different to what they usually sort of see. And I was really pleasantly surprised. It's not like something like that's never going to go viral. It's never going to get like the millions of hits that, like, you know, a relatable sketch or like the car stuff will. But at the same time, you know, just how people appreciate good content though. So if you make something that, you know, is still strikes a chord, or has you know, something that people can relate to or that they can appreciate, they'll always still be positive about it and be like, oh, this is great. There was literally a comment on that video that was like, I was fully expecting to say get back in the car, but you know what? This is actually really great. You know, and so that to me is like, oh, great. You know, people do actually, to some extent, kind of, they don't care who's in it, what is in it, as long as it's good content online, then they're willing to kind of get on board, you know.
And I think there's definitely like a craving at the moment for stuff that is, you know, authentically created and written, not something that's, like you said before, trying to sell something.
Yeah, totally. Because there's so much of that, especially like on Instagram and things like that. You know, I think we're becoming so like used to sort of, yeah, oh, what am I being peddled with this? You know, that I think it's important to make, you know, content that is just for the sake of entertainment as well. You know, especially if you're wanting to be an online creator, it's not falling into that trap of only doing, you know, sort of brand deals and stuff, because of people. Yeah, it's just people. And I think people have gotten a lot better at it though as well. Then when we first started doing brand deals, people were a lot more sort of scathing, where they're like, oh, like sellouts or whatever. And it's kind of sort of the thing you want to say to that sometimes is like, well, how do you guys expect for us to keep feeding ourselves and making stuff and doing whatever if we don't also earn money? You know, and like, yes, you're going to make some money online with your ad revenue, but it's never enough, especially with 3 people. You know, it's never enough to like sustain you. So the brand deals and stuff is like, that's how we can keep making the stuff that entertains you the rest of the time. And I think people have gotten better at understanding, okay, that's just what you know, online creators have to do. So sweet. Whereas initially, when people were like kind of used to getting, okay, this is YouTube, I come here to be entertained, like, you know, I'm not buying into anything else. And they were a bit more like brutal in like, if you did something out that was sponsored, you know.
Yeah, and it's, you know, there's also the question of actually valuing creators and creatives as a profession, not something that people are just entitled to as an audience.
Yeah, totally. And some people, I think, will still just never get it. But you know, I think the dedicated fans and stuff are just kind of like, they just love anything that you do, which is great.
That is great. What do you feel like is the biggest bomb that you've done in terms of like something that's failed?
Yeah, I mean, honestly, the funniest thing is, I think something that I've been really good at being able to figure out is like, and I'm trying to think though if there is anything that I actually have loaded that just really went terribly. But I tend to know before it even goes up, and then I just say let's not load this, And there's definitely been videos like that, like where you're just like, nah, this just is not hitting the mark. And actually, in our very early days of Sketchy, we some of those sketches that we made, like I was actually living with Christian Van Buren and Adele Vuko at the time, so like Bondi Hipsters, Adele from Skipbox. And so like their content, especially Christians, is a lot more like outside of the box, very like, it's almost like you got to be to some extent shocking people a little bit in order for it to be sort of funny. That's more their like brand and their vibe, and they've done that really, really well. And so initially, like before we had gone online and had these sort of more like costumed lip sync ones that went viral that made us more sort of, I suppose, wholesome, we had some like a sketch that we made, and it was like based off of my brother when he was at school, was part of this group. And am I allowed to say the C word?
You can say whatever you want.
Beep it out. Okay, cool. Yeah, he was like, they were called like the certified sick cunts, and and like the CSCs or whatever. And so like we made this sketch, and it was us as three boys, and we were in like Western Sydney, and we were like, in order to like be in our gang, you like had to say like the C word like every 5 seconds. And it's actually still to this day like one of the funniest things. And my dad loves it. He's like, it's just so funny, because it's just like, in order to be in the gang, he like, Lana's like dressed as like this boy. She looked like an ice addict or something, and she's got her box cutter to like get in the gang, and so it's one of those things where once we had those viral videos, like if we put something like that on, people would have just been like, what the hell have I like signed up for? So it's just knowing when like, okay, yeah, no, that one's not going to fly with our audience. Like you have to, you still have kids and things like that watch your stuff, and knowing when not to sort of be too out there that could be really offensive and things like that. So it's ones like, I think it's knowing what not to load as much as what's like, okay, like, and sometimes you have to just go for it, and know that like, yeah, it might be a mixed bag, and you'll learn from like that feedback. But yeah, it's also just sometimes going, okay, we might have spent money making this, but it's probably not worth the risk,
Sure. And I guess it also sort of boils down to how you're sort of defining, what's a failure and what's a success, and looking at a bigger picture as opposed to smaller details.
Yeah, totally. And some of the hardest things for us has been like because obviously a lot of what we made initially was a lot to do with commercial music, like using other people's commercial music. And in those days, like to some extent, you could kind of get away with like when you loaded it, okay, sometimes you might have it flagged, and the revenue kind of goes to that person, which is like, that's fine and kind of fair enough. But now, more and more often it'll be like, it actually blocks it. So if it's a a certain piece of music or whatever that's from a big artist, then the algorithms are so much better now that it picks it up. So sometimes when, in the past we've loaded things, and there's been times as well where the algorithm is just like, we did in our web series, we had a song that we did have the clearance to use, but it flagged it, and it took like 2 weeks for them to unblock it or whatever. And in that time there was like, whole countries of people that would click on the link and they couldn't watch it. And it's crazy how fickle people can be, because like people would just unsubscribe. Like literally not even just like, oh, I'm a bit annoyed, I can't think, like unsubscribe from the channel. We like saw this dip in our channel because people couldn't watch this piece of content that you'd promised them. So things like that we've sort of learnt from now, where like we've had to be a lot kind of more careful about this type of music we use, or using like, royalty free, or making our own stuff. I've started doing a lot more like raps and things like that are more like, okay, I've written this, this is the music, or it's a parody, and you can get it cleared under parody. So yeah, I just kind of learning from that as well, because yeah, you don't want to make something that then people can't see, or that you have to take down and all that kind of stuff. So that's all been a lot of trial and error as we've gone along as well.
Sounds like you're sort of an expert in minimizing minimizing the things that can inhibit your creative process, and maximizing the amount of control that you can have over putting stuff out.
Totally. Because it's, like, you never, when you're creating and building this audience, like, you never want to do anything that kind of gets them offside, because it's like, that's everything, So I suppose, like, as you go along, you're like, okay, and sometimes you have to take calculated risks, and sometimes it's better to just ask for permission instead of, like, or sorry, forgiveness as opposed to permission. And look, had we not done that, in the early days with some of those videos, like, we never would have had the traction that we did and stuff. So, I think sometimes you've just gotta go for it and hope for the best. But then, once it's and to some degree it's great that the algorithms and stuff on YouTube are sort of so much better, because I get it, like, using, it's like when people have ripped our video and uploaded it to, like, I found like a video once that had been loaded to some random Bali like Facebook page, and it had 80 million views and no link back to us whatsoever.
Wow.
So things like that. So, I am glad that there are, like, they're starting to be a bit more savvy about the way that they kind of combat stuff like that. But yeah, you've just kind of got to learn as you go and try to do what's best for your audience and your channel, and for like yourself as a creator, and know when to sort of make the difference.
Absolutely. How do you think that your idea of what successful content has changed since, say when you picked up and went to London and you were looking at creating this travel show versus now that you're looking at getting a feature film or a TV pilot off the ground? How's your idea of success evolved?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's definitely that sort of then, and when I first sort of thought about making things, was kind of along the lines of, like, all right, if I can just get something up, whatever it might be, if I can get something up, if I can get something like greenlit, like sort of, whatever that may be, I'd be happy, kind of thing, and I just want to be in the industry, and I want to be making things as my sort of full-time gig. And now that I'm fortunate enough to have that, I think it's like not being swayed and pushed in certain directions just because that's an opportunity, and knowing when to sort of say no. And look, I've got a few things on the horizon that I can't really talk about right now, where that has been like more prevalent than ever, where, okay, it might be on paper or like on sort of a really great opportunity, but you have to know, like, that's actually not really in the vein of like what I'm wanting to be portrayed as, or the kind of creator or director that I want to be, So although, yes, it might be a lot of money, or it might be, notoriety or things like that, like, so success for me, I suppose now, is more, okay, are you making things consistently that you're really proud of? Are you able to sort of go like, oh, I can stand behind this, and this represents me well. Because I think that's a little bit of the trap that you can fall into online too, is it's like, just doing what works, just doing like, okay, that resonates, people want that, or whatever. It's kind of like the Instagram thing of like, okay, yeah, you could post photos of your ass and that's going to get a lot of likes and a lot of whatever, but is that who you are and what you want to be like represented as? Like, it's kind of like that. And
I think I think that's probably more significant now than, I mean, let's look at the fire documentary. To see.
Yeah, I haven't seen it, but I've heard a lot about it.
It was it's one of the more anxious experiences I've had, but also one of the more hilariously kind of Schadenfreude was a word that I kept thinking while I was watching it.
Right, yeah.
Just because of the nature of some of the people that were involved in it, but yeah, I think that's a really significant point, and I think that's probably a great way to wrap up the conversation. I'm really grateful that you've jumped on the call with me at 7:30 in the morning in Brisbane.
Well, that's the one good thing about the time difference. Like, I'm still kind of on a late time, so I do actually wake up early here, which is good.
I do find that when I go back to Melbourne, that I am waking up at like 5:30 or 6 o'clock in the morning for a good 2 weeks, just sort of naturally, and it's a really great time to be up in the day. I should do it more often, but the alarm is just horrible.
I know. It's so weird how you kind of do, and when you're doing it here, you're like, yeah, that's great. I wish I could just do this all the time. But then the hard thing is when you go back to the States, then you used to have been getting up like 5 hours later, even if it is a sleep in or whatever. And it's just much harder to get back into that groove.
Well, I'm going to let you go, and I'm going to get back to watching the Oprah interview post leaving Neverland. But I do.
Oh, right.
Yeah, I just watched.
Very interesting.
I just watched that. It's a very heavy 4 hours of your life if you do choose to watch it.
Yeah, see, I was such a fan, and I know that I'm sort of, whatever the case, I'm sort of a bit heartbroken.
Yeah.
But so I'm just debating whether or not I want to know like the full story and the details, or whether or not I'm like, okay, I'm disappointed and I just have to leave it at that.
Yeah, I know a lot of people who share similar sentiments, and it's really it's a really difficult. This is a really depressing way to end this conversation, but it's a really difficult it's a really difficult topic, I guess, because yeah, it's pretty heavy.
Especially, I guess, something that, as you know, people have such, like, I mean, he's just so prolific in so many ways, and has impacted people's lives in so many ways with his music. So, to then kind of so far after the fact, have sort of these bombshells, I suppose. It's hard to kind of make sense of it, I guess.
Yeah, definitely. Well, that's why I really wanted to watch this Oprah interviewing these guys, because it feels a little bit more level-headed, and it feels like It's a really weird segue into what my last question is in every conversation.
Yeah.
Maybe it's ironic. I don't know. The question is, what makes you silly?
What makes me silly? Honestly, I think I love not taking myself too seriously. Do you know what I mean? Like, I love to be able to kind of and that's, I think, why I had so much success with Sketchy, and even in a lot of the things that I sort of am doing now with my own. I'm still making a lot of sketches and stuff even on my own Instagram. And so I think that what's refreshing and what I love is just to be able to, and I think it's a very Australian thing, just not take yourself too seriously, to be a bit of a dag, and to make other people laugh, like, at your own expense, like that's what makes me, like, silly, and I love being silly, and not sort of necessarily feeling the need to kind of look perfect all the time. And I think we have way too much of that online, and especially on Instagram. People, projecting and feeling the need to kind of be perfect and show a perfect life, and never kind of show, like, the flaws. And I did a video last year called Bare All, like a Bare All thing, where I rapped and had no makeup on, and talked about how I've, like, getting grey hairs and, cellulite, and just the side of things is, like, we all have, and we all kind of experience, but not enough people, I think, talk about it, or are honest enough about it to just be like, yeah, I've got that. I'm not perfect. Neither are you. So yeah, I don't know, does that answer your question?
That absolutely answers my question. And if anyone wants to see you being silly, they can, unlike a lot of my other guests, they can actually see you being silly online.
Yes, they can. So Sketchy, or my Instagram's it's Shae-Lee Shack. So yeah, any of those platforms, there's a bunch of stuff that should hopefully make you laugh.
Thanks so much, Shae-Lee.
No worries. Thanks for having me.